Good afternoon or good morning to everyone who has joined us today. Thank you everyone for being here for a session on telco and hyperscaler strategies, how to coexist, where we will explore how telcos can collaborate and partner with the hyperscale cloud providers and leverage different capabilities as operators seek to move up the value chain. So before I get started, a few housekeeping items. First, you are all in listen-only mode, but if you are having any issues with audio or visual, please leave a comment in the questions tab and one of our team members will assist you. We will also have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit in any questions for our presenters throughout the session, also using the questions tab. And for everyone who has registered for the session, you will receive the slides and the recording shortly after the webinar to watch back and share with your colleagues. And you will also be receiving a summary write-up of the Q&A in case you have missed anything. And finally, before we kick off, if you are active on social media, please feel free to tweet us at STL Partners and hashtag STL Thinks. Great. So just to kick it off, let me introduce myself and allow my colleagues to introduce themselves too. My name is Yesmean. I'm one of the senior consultants at STL Partners, and I head up our telco cloud practice. And Grace, over to you.
Hi everybody, I'm Grace Donnelly. I'm also a senior consultant at STL Partners, and I also work on the telco cloud practice with Yesmean.
And hello everyone, I'm David Martin. I'm an associate senior analyst and I head up STL's telco cloud research business, producing a lot of their sort of reports and a tracker service on telco cloud.
Great, thanks everyone. So we're just, in order to get us focused on the presentation, first and foremost, I wanted to share that this session that we will have with you today builds on our ongoing work across both our consulting and our research business, and this includes learnings from our work with operators in this topic area, as well as research reports such as the Microsoft affirmed a Metaswitch report, what does it mean for telecoms, that David has written, and also our telco edge computing, how to partner with the hyperscalers. And if you don't know already, we have dedicated practice areas looking at both telco cloud and edge computing. So to get us started, first and foremost, what we wanted to touch upon was some of the context. So the hyperscalers and telcos coexist in a very dynamic ecosystem. And while telcos are looking to move up the value chain and provide services beyond connectivity, the hyperscalers are also increasingly active in the telecoms value chain. And with involvement in edge and private LTE and networks, the reality offers a broad scope for hyperscalers to partner and not just compete with the telcos. And so what are we going to dive into today? So the first key point that we wanted to highlight was the broader verticalization strategies that are happening, both by telecoms operators themselves and also the hyperscalers increasingly looking to verticalize in specific industries, and also including the hyperscalers in the telco industry. The second point that we will touch on is around the fact that operators are increasingly of the mindset that hyperscaler partnerships are inevitable. And therefore, we will explore how, what are the different potential partnership models that hyperscalers are addressing, and David will share more detail on this. The third is around the benefits and drawbacks that we've seen from our research in this area and with operators themselves. And the main drawbacks we found aren't just about the technical aspects, it's also on the strategic aspects in terms of, as an operator, how do I ensure as a telco I am providing value beyond just being a connectivity provider? And the last point that we will dive into in more detail is around the difference between the three big hyperscale cloud providers, AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure, and what are the different partnership models that they individually are addressing. And Grace will be sharing a few more case studies on that side. So on the first point, one thing that's been very interesting and quite apparent in a lot of conversations that we've been having with operators themselves is the sentiment that it's not a question of if we are going to partner with the hyperscalers, it's about how. And so diving down into a bit more detail in terms of that verticalization, as I mentioned. So historically, like operators themselves, the hyperscale cloud providers have always had more of a horizontal growth strategy. With regards to the telco operators, this was about providing voice and messaging services. And for the hyperscale cloud providers, this was about cloud infrastructure as a service. This was about providing the compute and the storage. And increasingly, what we are seeing is that both telcos and hyperscalers are moving towards providing more higher value tailored solutions for specific target industries. For example, the industrial sectors, manufacturing or retail or finance, and so on and so forth. And what is this all part of? So we would argue this is part of the industry moving to what we have termed the coordination age. Up until about the 1990s, the focus was on connecting people to one another using voice and messaging, where the telecoms business model was around subscriptions and per unit pricing. Then came the information age, which was all about enabling the exchange of information and ease of transaction with an explosion of communication between humans than ever before. And with that, we saw a huge decrease in product and service transactions. And now what we're seeing is we're coming into what we've referred to as the coordination age, where it's not just about connecting people, it's about connecting things and seeing huge volumes of analyzable data and the ability to leverage advanced analytics and AI, and more importantly, the need to determine how resources should be managed more efficiently and effectively than ever before to tackle societal challenges. And so we argue that there are different maturing and developing and emerging technologies that enable the core capabilities in the coordination age. And while it required developing the right skills and capabilities, we do see this as a key opportunity for telcos. And these enablers are: one, the exchange of communications and information; two, insights; and three, action. And with this combination, the ability to coordinate resources in real time is actually being possible for the first time. And so why telcos? This is about carrying and providing and managing data in real time. And this is also the fact that telcos have the advantage of being trusted in comparison to some of how the internet players are being perceived. And also telcos are regulated in their local markets. For example, the need to have strong privacy policies. And on top of that, with 5G and edge and IoT and the virtualization and cloudification of the network, telcos are increasingly also becoming much more agile in themselves and driving that within themselves to enhance their abilities to address customer challenges. But in this inherent complexity will mean a shift to more of an ecosystem-centric view of the world in figuring out how the role of operators within a B2B to X ecosystem looks like, and what are the choices that have to be made in the role that telcos want to play and how to get there. So what does this mean when it comes to the hyperscalers then? So as I mentioned, telcos are trying to grow revenues beyond traditional connectivity, and although they do have the credibility and some of the capabilities and relationships within to provide value in the coordination age, we would argue that there's still a lot of work to be done. There is significant investment that is required to build the right capabilities, the skill set, and also the processes and operational models to do this. And on top of that, the reality is that operators don't have the resource or management bandwidth to serve all industries beyond connectivity. So strategic choices will have to be made on which are the target industries they want to focus on and what can they do there, and also where they want to work with potential partners such as the hyperscale cloud providers to succeed in that space. And then on the flip side, the hyperscalers see this as a significant opportunity in the telecoms industry, not seeing the telcos just as customers, but also as partners. So in the first instance, if you think about the telecoms industry as another industry, and if you look at the concept of IT and OT meaning operational technology, the hyperscalers have always had a stronger relationship across different industries in the IT side, the telecoms industry included, but now increasingly want to play a bigger role in the OT. And when it comes to the telecoms industry, the OT is effectively the network infrastructure. But as I mentioned, it's not about seeing telcos as customers, it's also as partners. And as we look to, for example, edge computing, telco's network infrastructure is a core asset for edge computing and the access to suitable locations for distributed compute. And the hyperscalers have a platform that can federate and manage this distributed ecosystem. So there's an interesting dynamic happening in how hyperscalers and telcos can partner, but at the same time, need to figure out what their longer term strategies are to effectively maximize their share of the market value. So now I'll hand over to David to dive down into what this looks like.
Thanks, Yesmean. Yeah, so the second point here is that I think there is now an increasing realization that has dawned on many telcos that partnerships with hyperscalers are inevitable. Having said that, obviously there is a wide range of partnership options and business models that the hyperscalers are addressing, and that also that telcos are interested in exploring. These models are developing in different ways, which we'll discuss. Next slide, please. So from the operator perspective, obviously there are different drivers for operators to partner with hyperscalers. We would sort of divide this into sort of three broad categories. Clearly, not all operators are going to want to partner with hyperscalers on all of these levels, or equally, they're not going to want to partner with the same hyperscaler for each of those categories. So there's a differentiated strategy that operators are trying to navigate their way through at the moment. So you know, the three sort of areas of focus for partnerships with hyperscalers from the operator perspective, obviously here, edge, network, and IT. There are quite a lot of points here. I won't necessarily sort of go into the detail of every point, but really in a way that they sort of form into sort of three broad areas really, which is that hyperscalers and operators have complementary skills that are both needed, and they need each other in terms of developing, you know, the edge use cases. For example, we see, you know, under edge here, operators lack the platform stack to deliver the kind of edge use cases they want to serve. Well, the hyperscalers can provide that. Equally, the hyperscalers don't have the connectivity or the ability to provide, you know, the advanced communications capabilities in the access network which operators can provide for those low latency and distributed use cases. So they're complementary skills, and there is a sort of, you know, relationship of equals that has the potential to sort of develop there. And then, of course, there's the possibility of driving innovation. And here under IT, you know, co-creation between hyperscalers and the telcos can provide, you know, a multiplication effect. They can each bring something to the party. It isn't necessarily a case, as is often sort of portrayed, that the hyperscalers have all of the aces in their pack, all of the ability to innovate at a software sort of level. You know, operators are also developing you know, new programmable capabilities within the network through cloud-native network functions, and are able to sort of contribute, you know, bespoke networking architectures and services to serve the needs of individual use cases. The other aspect is that the partnerships between the hyperscalers and the telcos is a significant driver of cost savings and efficiencies for both the operators and the hyperscalers. It shortens the development cycles potentially for cloud native and for developing those edge sites that both will need. Each can bring something to the party that enables the cost and the efficiencies to be optimized. So if we move on to the next slide there. So this is how we sort of see the progress to date in terms of the maturity of telcos' adoption of public cloud infrastructure for their network infrastructure stack. I mean, a lot has been obviously spoken over the last few years about network functions virtualization and now cloud native network functions and telco cloud. But here we're talking about the public hyperscale cloud and the extent to which different aspects of the telco stack are more or less mature within the hyperscale cloud. So at the sort of advanced end of the scale to the right, I think it's sort of fair to say that use cases and applications around analytics and AI, OSS, BSS, and general sort of internal IT for telcos are more mature, and they're more proven, and they've been more extensively deployed and brought into commercial production. Sort of lagging sort of closely behind that is the sort of the edge compute use cases, the MEC, whether it's on premise at the enterprise or at the network edge. The enterprise network functions. Now, I mean, in terms of the progress of NFV and SDN, we're all very familiar with the virtualized network functions supporting enterprise wide area networking and so on. But in terms of the actual hyperscale cloud, that's still something that is being sort of developed by many different providers, obviously not just telcos, by the SD-WAN vendors and by other network equipment vendors. But that's something that's developing rapidly now in terms of providing the capability for virtualized networking that to some extent can bypass telcos, but equally telcos can actually tap into those capabilities to develop their own services. And then on the less mature side of the equation, perhaps in the sense most critically for operators, are all of the core and the access network functions. Thinking in particular of the 5G core and standalone, the network slicing, and the RAN, particularly vRAN, virtualized RAN, and Open RAN, which are obviously quite sort of mature in terms of architectures and in terms of telco deployments, particularly in the core side. But obviously RAN is developing very rapidly, but not so mature on the hyperscale cloud. In fact, later on, Grace is going to be providing looking at the case study of AWS and in the US with Dish, which is an example of that actually beginning to be deployed and in a commercial network on the public cloud. So next slide, please. So looking at this now more from the perspective of the hyperscalers, as opposed to the sort of telcos, we would sort of argue that there are 5 main business models that we can see that are emerging, that hyperscalers are attempting to sort of develop and push into the telco vertical. First of all, perhaps slightly sort of counterintuitively, there's a classic vendor-telco relationship. In particular, I'm thinking of the likes of the Microsoft acquisition of Affirmed and Metaswitch. And Microsoft, in the way it's commercializing that, is very much saying, well, this is actually a continuation of the way Metaswitch and Affirmed have always operated. We're interested in exploring deep relationships with telcos and helping to sort of leverage the scale and the virtualization benefits that the hyperscale cloud can bring to those cloud native network functions, but in a way that sort of enlarges and broadens the scope of an existing type of vendor telco relationship. Then the second type of model there, this is what we have dubbed as network functions as a service, which is basically hyperscale hosting and delivery of some of those sort of core network functions, also of the RAN, also of orchestration, generally anything that's basically a telco cloud based virtualized network function that the hyperscalers can bring that sort of scale and those capabilities to deliver those in a flexible way across a distributed cloud. Then the next model. This is what we have termed, perhaps slightly verbosely, telco-orientated platform as a service, or PaaS, which actually sort of comprises a lot of things and is in fact a more mature sort of business model. It's along the lines of what we were saying in a previous slide about some of the OSS and BSS and the internal IT. It's really anything that allows telcos to sort of to manage, to host, to develop their own internal apps, their APIs, their analytics, to provide that as a platform to telcos, to facilitate enhanced network and service management, orchestration, to create a go-to-market platform so that some of those telco capabilities around billing, about customer relationship management, about assurance can be leveraged for some of the more bespoke use cases, the private networking, the new applications, so that it creates a go-to-market platform for sort of telcos across the public cloud. And the multi-cloud dimension, the multi-cloud orchestration and connectivity, which telcos can both leverage to provide services to their enterprise customers that are wanting to manage their own applications, particularly in the cloud native perspective across multiple clouds, but also which enables telcos themselves to operate in a multi-cloud way to sort of and to run their sort of network functions in a flexible and open way across multiple hyperscale clouds. Next slide. Next section. So then there's what we term network as a cloud platform, which, breaking it down simply, is basically when the hyperscalers can leverage the telco edge as basically the platform for their own edge cloud. So it's rolling out hyperscale edge cloud across the telco network. So it's basically rolling out the edge cloud data centers, the hyperscale edge stack into the telco edge locations to effectively serve as a cloud delivery platform for third-party application developers and to produce some of those low latency dependent services. And finally, net compute, as we have dubbed it, which is essentially a threefold concept, if you like, which is illustrated by that little graphic there, which is the sort of tight coupling or interdependency of 5G, but not just 5G, any form of robust ultra-fast connectivity adapted to the specific environments and the use cases required, alongside advanced computing, AI, and cloud-native software, whether the actual application software or the network function software, where all three poles of that, the connectivity, and particularly actually also thinking of the physical characteristics of the connectivity, if we're talking about challenging environments or distributed environments, where the skills and the capabilities of operators are absolutely mission critical to the development of those apps, are aligned with and enabled by, but also enable those advanced computing based applications, those real-time applications, those applications that are dependent on AI. And in terms of the actual software stack, the cloud native software, the ability to program the network functions and to evolve the network functions to around the specific requirements of the application and the use case, all of which are present many opportunities for operators and rely on many capabilities that operators already have and are developing in terms of the cloud native dimension of network functions. So the next slide. So we're going to have a poll here, looking at those 5 models that we've just outlined. In your opinion, which of those 5 partnership models will be the most widely adopted by telcos? Which will they pick up in the short term? So if we have a few minutes to sort of think about that and hit the respective button. Unfortunately, it's a forced thing that you can only pick one category. So so we've got the classic telco vendor relationship, network functions as a service, telco orientated platform as a service, network as a cloud platform, or net compute. So I don't know how much time we have left on the poll. Let's see if we get the results now. Interesting, a fairly sort of even split really there. Telco orientated platform as a service being ahead, which in a sense isn't that surprising insofar as that's definitely something that telcos and hyperscalers have been developing very actively over the last couple of years or so, and is most mature in our estimation. Interesting that the classic vendor telco relationship is also polling quite strongly there. That's maybe something we could return to in the Q&A if we have time. So if we go on to the next part of the presentation. So I'm looking at our sort of executive summary points there. So we've looked at the different ways in which telcos can partner with hyperscalers, but then there are some, obviously critical strategic decisions and the risk and opportunity calculations that telcos have to make. Well, how do I partner with the hyperscalers without ceding value to them? Obviously, in terms of those edge use cases and the other kind of use cases actually avoiding being sort of in a sense dominated by the hyperscalers, and also then how do we make things work on public cloud infrastructure? Particularly, how can we sort of actually ensure that we can deliver those carrier grade real-time services reliably on public cloud infrastructure rather than our own sort of dedicated infrastructure. So we'll look at some of those sort of risk and opportunity equations now, or critical questions that are being asked. So on the sort of opportunity side, clearly there are a lot of potential benefits to partnerships, as we've already been elaborating. So in terms of accelerating time to market with new services, the hyperscalers have the scale, they have the capabilities, they have the tools, they have the partnerships, they have the ability to develop those software centric use cases, the access to the developer ecosystem and the community, access to an established customer base, which telcos don't have to anything like the same extent, and the software skills and capabilities, particularly in the area of AI and machine learning, and the strength of the public cloud offerings, which is undeniable. It's the market force and the sort of the scale of the hyperscalers. But on the risk side, obviously this is, in a sense, quite a familiar checklist. How can operators avoid being relegated to the role of a connectivity provider? In other words, in some of those network as a cloud platform use cases, how can telcos avoid simply being the party that provides the sort of connectivity, the physical connectivity, the managed networking aspects of those, while the hyperscalers develops the more valuable software and compute centered aspects of the services? How can telcos actually compete in terms of developing, building, offering their own sort of distinct edge offerings? How can the risk of dependency on the hyperscalers, which risks reinstating a form of vendor lock-in, particularly if the telcos are getting their sort of network functions over the hyperscale cloud. The bottom instance there, potentially telcos could lose control not only of the ability to develop their own distinct edge offerings and to reap some of the sort of value add from those, but they could even lose control over the ability to evolve their core network functions as well and become even more dependent on the hyperscalers for that and be relegated to an even more subordinate role potentially. And also there's what we've termed here unproven benefits on TCO savings, total cost of ownership, with public cloud delivered network functions. In other words, I think the economic case in terms of effectively sourcing your core network functions from the hyperscale cloud are as yet unproven in terms of the management and the costs involved. And I think that's something that is yet to be established, or certainly not self-evident that it's a more cost-effective option for telcos in the long run. So if we go to the next slide. Just to sort of summarize that and then to sort of lead on to the next part of the presentation, we sort of argued that compared with AWS and Google Cloud, as we'll see in the next slide, in fact, Microsoft is addressing more of those types of potential partnership models that we've elaborated, those 5 models, and seems to have more of a focus on enabling telco cloud rather than simply equipping telco networks as an extension of the hyperscale cloud. And we see that in this sort of next slide, which illustrates that, and then we'll lead on to our case studies. So here are our 5 models recapitulated, and our contention, at least, would be that Azure, Microsoft Azure, effectively at the moment in the activity that we see already is basically operating across all of those 5 sort of areas, whereas AWS and Google Cloud seem to have a more narrow focus, which you could sort of summarize as basically selling to telcos, selling them the PaaS and the network functions as a service, but also selling through telcos, leveraging the telco edge and the connectivity capabilities that they've been building with 5G and so on, basically to serve as an extension into the edge of the hyperscale cloud to deliver those low latency critical use cases. So now I'm going to hand over to Grace to look at some case studies that illustrate some of those points.
Thanks, David. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm going to talk through some case studies, give some examples of these different partnership business models working in practice. So I'm going to be looking at 3 to give almost the full range of the partnership models that David discussed. So the first is AWS and Dish, which is an example of a business model to deliver network function as a service and network as a cloud platform. Then I'm going to look at an example of Orange and Google Cloud, which illustrates the telco-orientated platform as a service, or PaaS. And then finally looking at Azure and AT&T, which is an example of a partnership to deliver net compute. So first up is AWS and Dish, and the move to Cloud Telco. So in April this year, it was announced that Dish will be using Amazon Elastic Cloud Compute to host a fully virtualized 5G network on public cloud. And this marks a breakthrough in cloud native networks, as Dish is the first major telco to be hosting operational network on public cloud infrastructure. With 2 of the 3 major RAN functions running on AWS, it makes it the first standalone cloud-based 5G Open RAN in the US. And the partnership works by Dish leveraging AWS's edge computing portfolio to accelerate its 5G rollout. It will connect the full hardware and network management resources through AWS's platform. And benefits of this include things like rapid scaling and on-demand responsiveness to customer needs. And AWS will enhance Dish's fully automated OSS BSS. and Dish is dependent on AWS's backbone to transfer the data from local zones into AWS regions. So some of the benefits of this partnership to Dish include speed, so leveraging public cloud enables quicker rollout, cost efficiency, so using AWS to host these virtual base stations on its network is cheaper than buying servers and hosting them on site or private cloud. And they also gain access to AWS's developer ecosystem, which simplifies the process for developers looking to create new applications through standardized APIs. There are some drawbacks though, so the infrastructure and network is on AWS's edge and central cloud rather than it being a completely equal partnership, which means that Dish may end up becoming over-dependent on AWS. And also with this platform, this partnership, AWS are creating a platform to expand into edge and ultimately into telco service delivery. There's also the associated lock-in to proprietary telco cloud platforms and vendor-supported best-of-breed network functions. So for example, VMware or vendor distributions of OpenStack or OpenShift. And there's also implications here for Mavenir and Altio Star with Dish's infrastructure moving to public cloud, because Dish announced in April of 2020 that they were partnering with Mavenir to deliver cloud-native Open RAN software. And their partnership was with Altio Star in June of 2020 as they developed a cloud-native microservice-based Open RAN solution. So there's a question here around, will they have to go through the pain point of making sure everything is integrated and works on this public cloud infrastructure? So that'll be interesting to see. So next up is an example of a partnership to deliver platform as a service, or PaaS. So the Orange and Google Cloud partnership will help Orange enable edge, AI, and data analytics cloud-based services. So in 2020, they announced a partnership that will accelerate Orange's IT infrastructure and the development of their future cloud services through a common hosting and development environment. And the collaboration will help deliver cloud capabilities at the edge of Orange's network through this PaaS model. Within the partnership, each side brings its own expertise. So Google Cloud has its knowledge of cloud technology, analytics, AI tools, as well as their own digital transformation methodology and their dedicated resources. And Orange brings its information and communication technology services and its multinational network infrastructure. And together they've agreed to create a joint innovation lab and a centre of excellence, which will enable new solution development based on data and AI within the broader framework of the evolving 5G edge computing ecosystem. And the Centre of Excellence will provide Google Cloud support for Orange France and their other affiliates as they engage in their cloud transformation. And the centre will provide training in things like data, AI, cloud services for several thousand Orange employees. And Google's technology will give Orange a hosted development platform to host its internal applications on public cloud infrastructure, including BSS, OSS, as well as next generation data analytics and machine learning. And then Orange can in turn use these enhanced capabilities to develop their own customer offerings and ultimately engage enterprise customers in a more agile way. So for example, through multi-cloud offerings. And Google benefits from reinforcing its presence in Europe through this partnership as a significant cloud player. There are other examples of this partnership model too. So Google also announced a partnership with TELUS in February of this year. And together they're co-innovating new services and solutions. And together they're going to transform key industries that they've targeted, including healthcare, agriculture, security, and connected home. It also helps to accelerate TELUS's IT and network modernization, so it'll enable their agility and ultimately improve customer experience. Vodafone too have partnered with Google Cloud, and they're going to host their SAP environment and all big data and business intelligence workloads on Google Cloud. And they're planning to build an integrated data platform and distribution system for Vodafone to create new digital products and services. And it's also worth mentioning here that it's not just telcos, it's also network equipment providers are looking to play in the PaaS partnership model space. So Ericsson recently announced that they've partnered with AWS to deliver its BSS portfolio through Amazon Cloud. and Amdoc's partnership with Microsoft. They're collaborating across different domains to provide CSPs with cloud-based services so they can more rapidly launch offerings to market. Also their own data management platform and their self-service visualization and reporting solution is available on Azure. And Nokia, they've launched the first AI use case library for telcos to be delivered as a service on Azure Public Cloud. And Nokia's AI as a service, this allows CSPs to deploy AI use cases quickly, securely, and they can complete the data setup in just 4 weeks. And the features of this partnership are that they have telco-grade security and instant web scale architecture scalability to help CSPs with their digital transformations. So it is more complex than just telco plus hyperscaler relationship in this space. Also, Google Cloud has a slightly different emphasis than AWS or Microsoft Azure. Their platform is more software focused and enables multi-cloud in comparison to AWS and Azure, which is more of an extensive infrastructure offering and therefore more infrastructure focused. And in these examples of Google's partnerships with Orange, TELUS and Vodafone, these are more to do with cross-platform multi-cloud orchestration, which is substantiated in software rather than being embedded in Google's own cloud. And this emphasis may be due to Google being slightly later to the game. So instead of trying to compete head on, it's a change of tack to focus more on the software elements instead. So now I'll move on to the final example, looking at net compute partnership to enable network intelligence services. So in July of 2019, Microsoft and AT&T announced their partnership with the aim to bring to market integrated solutions, including in the areas of voice, collaboration and conferencing, intelligent edge, networking, IoT, public safety, and cybersecurity. And Azure and AT&T have been co-developing, and they've been playing a really hands-on part in developing these use cases rather than simply providing the connectivity that enables third-party applications. And some of these co-developed use cases include AI-powered voice translation for first responders looking to communicate with people in a different language. There's also the Microsoft HoloLens, which provides a 3D schematic overlay for technicians making repairs to aeroplanes or other industrial equipment. But one co-developed use case that we want to highlight in particular is drone tracking, which really typifies what we mean here by network intelligence. So AT&T and Microsoft are using cloud to make airspace safer for drones. They've partnered with Vorpal, which is an Israeli startup, on their drone tracking solution called Vigilair. And Vorpal uses a geographically distributed network of sensors that allows drones to track their own movement and position autonomously in real time to prevent any collisions with other drones. And each sensor has its own computing hardware, which processes the location tracking software. And that means that the drones need more compute power. The more that drones are in the air, the more compute power is needed to handle all this data. So to ensure that Vigilair can maintain these capabilities and the low latency that they need, they're working with AT&T and Microsoft to use edge computing to potentially track thousands of drones at the same time. And in these examples, it's only really the drone tracking use case that meets our strict definition of net compute in that it's fully autonomous, but the other applications like the AI voice translation and the HoloLens also involve a high degree of interdependence between these compute-enabled real-world functions and the functionalities of the 5G network. And in this example, it's interesting that AT&T is present as a completely indispensable partner in developing and commercializing these applications, which is somewhat in contrast to some other examples that we've seen. So through the AWS wavelength zones via the Verizon 5G network, Verizon really only provides the 5G connectivity, while it's AWS and its application partners that together they develop the services to offer commercially and almost certainly garner a greater share of the revenues in that example. So that's the end of the case study deep dives. I'll now hand you back to Yesmean, who's going to talk through some of our recommendations for telcos going forward.
Yep, thanks, Grace. So, I mean, what we've done, and I know we've covered a lot of content here, and of course we can continue to talk about this for hours and hours on end, but we've highlighted 3 key sort of broad recommendations, and we've broken it out into the different, I guess, potential plays. So the first, we're going to look at the infrastructure play, and then look at the platform, and look at then, for example, the vertical specific applications. And within the infrastructure play, we've really split it out into 2 different angles. So the first is more the commercial angle, and this is about, how telcos can potentially consider leveraging others' infrastructure to accelerate deployments and edge locations. And it could be, for example, with the hyperscalers, or it could be with other infrastructure players, or even, for example, with other operators to build this out. And when it comes to more the operational angle, and for example, that core, the network infrastructure, it's not, the question really here is not just about, well, how do you partner with the hyperscalers in that? It's more of a question of what you see as your telco cloud strategy and how the hyperscalers fit into that. So one of the things that we've covered in more detail quite recently in our Telco Cloud Manifesto is the different pros and cons and the level of accountability that you are willing to take within that, and the role that you want to play. So, for example, there are certain, telcos who are looking to go down sort of the one-stop shop route, or others who are much more focused on enabling and building a best-of-breed ecosystem and maintaining that flexibility. But at the same time, there are different challenges in how you manage that, and whether that's through, for example, an SI to help piece together the different components to make sure that everything is interoperable and that it meets, sort of the carrier grade requirements, or whether it's something in some cases that some of the much larger or more ambitious operators are looking to do themselves, to piece together themselves. And so it's really a question of the degree to which you see partnering with the hyperscalers, or any vendor for that matter, in particular domains, and how that makes you strategically dependent on them. And a lot of the concerns that we're seeing from operators is, when it comes to partnering with the hyperscale cloud providers, particularly in running your core network functions on the public cloud infrastructure, does this mean that you are moving from one walled garden to another? In terms of that platform play, what we are really trying to focus on and recommend is it's not a you build or you borrow. It's not an either or. We would say it's more of a hybrid or a multi-platform strategy. And in some cases, there are operators who are looking to leverage either the hyperscaler or third-party edge cloud platforms as a means of going to market with new services quickly, to enter new markets quickly or new verticals quickly, and with much lower risk, especially as the market is still very nascent today. It's still emerging, and one of the key aspects to that is also lowering, lower capex, and being able to, I guess, do this without investing a significant amount of capex in developing this. But at the same time, one of the things that we would say is that, telcos should really see this as a stepping stone to developing perhaps your own platform stack. And say some might do this, some might purely focus on more the borrow strategy. But for those who are looking to build their own platform stack, this is, in a way, could be more of a long-term strategy as you try and build the expertise and try and build some of the skills and capabilities, and also the know-how and the ecosystem partners to be able to succeed in that space. And finally, where a lot of the value does lie is more on the applications. And in here, we've also talked about the more vertical specific applications. And one of the key things here that we wanted to flag is that, the key area that telcos are trying to focus on is how they can leverage others' ecosystems, and also to build out their ecosystems to address specific verticals, whether it be manufacturing or automotive or, retail and finance. But at the same time, we would argue that in order to try and consolidate the role and the value that a telco can bring, you too should invest in some of the own expertise and skills and have these conversations with customers to understand what their key pain points are and what different technologies, whether it is around edge computing or private cellular or IoT, how can these provide value to their business? How can these solve key operational pain points that your customer has to deal with? And at the same time, with the cloud virtualization and cloudification of the network, we are seeing this emerging interest in applications interfacing much more with the network. And so in comparison to the past, where application developers would see the network as a bit of a black box, now that's changing. And therefore, as an operator, we see a huge opportunity in playing a role in providing that network intelligence and network insight to application developers through that network accessibility and instructability. And for example, in edge computing, this could be about leveraging that network intelligence or insight to be able to intelligently distribute your edge workloads to the closest node in order to provide that low latency for the application, but also for the customers. So I know we've covered a lot, and that wraps up our presentation for today. Thank you so much to Grace and David, and thank you so much to everyone for tuning in. I hope everyone found it insightful. I know we only have about 10 minutes left, and I can see over the presentation we've had a lot of questions. So just to recap, to those who have questions today, we will endeavor to get through as many as possible in today's session, but for the ones that we don't get to, please continue to submit your questions in. We will include them and answer them in a Q&A write-up document that we will send to all registrants. So please keep them coming. I can see now the session was recorded. You will get a copy of the slides and the recording after, so you can share with your colleagues. So one of the high-level questions I wanted to just address from one of the audience, and this is to David. So we have mapped out these 5 business models and mapped the particular hyperscalers to each of them. And how do you see this changing over time? How do you see, let's say, for example, the AWS or the Googles of the world looking to, go beyond that? How do you see this changing in the next, 3 to 5 years? Oh, I think David is on mute. Okay, so we can jump on to the next question and I'll address that. Let me just have a look at some of the questions. So one of the questions we saw was from Juan Carlos, and it was around how do you see operators ready for providing these network accessibility and programmability and instructability that we mentioned, and what are the challenges and recommendations? So our view with this, especially as telcos are moving towards more ecosystem-centric models, is that this is a huge part of providing value to that ecosystem. It's a way of enabling your ecosystem partners to do more and providing more of that. One of the challenges that we have seen with that is particularly when it comes to how you provide those network insights in a secure and manageable way. How do you expose some of that to, some of the network functions to those customers? And this, in many ways, is about greater API exposure to enable this and doing this in a much more standardized way. And so you aren't, relying on bespoke, let's say, ways of trying to address this. But at the same time, I would argue that one of the challenges with this is it also then requires a change in mindset and a change in the way that you see your role as an operator and how you try and address that, because I think today we've seen a lot of talk around partnerships and ecosystems, and there's a key difference in terms of what a partnership means versus what an ecosystem means. And there's a different set of requirements that come with enabling and participating or even orchestrating ecosystems. So I saw another question earlier around the Dish and the the Dish and AWS partnership and the implications and impact for some of their key partners, for example, like VMware. I'm not sure, Grace, if you had any particular thoughts on that.
I think that beyond kind of testing whether the integration works on the public cloud, that there is the implication that now it's Dish's partnerships will become equally dependent on AWS. So it would be interesting to know kind of behind the scenes what the agreement was, because I know that when the news came out, it was somewhat of a surprise to quite a few people. So I think that's kind of a TBC, and we'll see where that one goes.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting as well because you know, Dish is using VMware's solutions and that software to run on top of AWS services. For example, for instance, Outpost, which is integrated to function with VMware's control platform. So it is quite interesting to see, I guess, that relationship there, because there is already sort of a level of pre-integration, as we mentioned, but it will be interesting to see how this plays out, particularly for Dish's other partners with Mavenir and LTO Star. I see David's just rejoined as well. He had a couple issues. So David, just a quick question that we kind of skipped through was, you know, we mapped these 5 business models out in terms of what the hyperscaler cloud providers are addressing. How do you see that changing in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yes, sorry about my technical issues there. Well, yes, and that's how we're sort of seeing things at the moment. I think you know, it's a very sort of fluid situation. And my own sort of hunch is, well, it's twofold really. Is that I don't sort of see either AWS or Google Cloud really having particular ambitions to themselves drill down into the nitty-gritty of telco network functions and networking. That's not really their sort of ball game. Having said that, they basically, as the market expands and as the interdependency of edge cloud with networking and advanced networking and cloud native network functions develops, that's maybe something that they will, in fact, get more deeply enmeshed in. And certainly AWS's adventure with Dish really, in a sense, is the start of that, or could be viewed as the start of that, insofar as, in a way, the Dish network is developing as basically an extension of the AWS cloud, being so very dependent on the cloud tools and the architecture and the infrastructure. But whereas Microsoft, I think, because of their tradition, because of their legacy, because of their deep involvement already in enterprise networking, I see as being more interested in exploring those sort of deeper partnerships between networking, network functions, and the advanced sort of edge compute-based use cases. I think we see that in the acquisition of, Affirmed Networks and Metaswitch. And of course, Metaswitch is being evolved very much around the UC as a a service and the extension of unified communications functionality across different aspects of what has traditionally been, the domain of telcos. I think that's something that Microsoft is not wanting to become an operator, but I think it's wanting to become very much an enabler of advanced use cases within which telco networking and the evolution of networking around cloud native is very much pivotal and central.
So one final question, because I know we have 1 minute left and we've got a lot of questions, and a few of them have been about this particular area where a lot of our audience members have talked about, let's say, telcos leveraging the hyperscaler cloud infrastructure for actual networking and, the network functions, and that's how a completely different ball game. And how do you see this playing out, David? And, what are sort of the benefits or arguments against this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a very complex question, but I certainly interpret Microsoft's move, with the acquisition of Affirmed and Metaswitch, as indicating a determination to equip the public cloud to act as a carrier grade delivery platform for sort of network functions. And I think with the development around Open RAN particularly as well, certainly with Dish and AWS, there is clearly also a determination for the AWS cloud to serve both as an enabler of the Dish Open RAN platform, both in the macro network, but also particularly in the private networking space. So I think we have to maybe sort of draw a distinction between maybe the private networking and the macro network in the short to medium term. It's probably the private networking and the enterprise specific and vertical specific use cases that have more potential then. But as these things develop, as 5G itself evolves and 5G Open RAN evolves, I think there's going to be, perhaps an inflection point where it starts to become much more feasible for all sorts of different players to start providing those kind of core network functions and the RAN network functions in support of, a wider sort of palette, if you like, of network-based services. So I think in the longer term, I think, we are going to see an evolution towards that.
Great. Thanks so much. So that wraps up our session for today. In terms of, we have a few upcoming webinars, and I know we've seen a few questions about the need for that agility. So in case you are interested, we have an upcoming one on the 16th of June on sharing insights from an interview program with CSPs globally on the role of agility, particularly when it comes to the enterprise opportunity. And there we will have a live panel session with Telia and STC and Ericsson. And then on the 24th of June, we'll have another session on driving innovative 5G monetization and user management. And so as telcos, become integrated carriers supporting a diverse range of new services and business models becomes increasingly important. And what will this require? Thank you everyone again so much for joining. As I mentioned, all registrants will be receiving the recording and the slides via email tomorrow. Thank you everyone for the huge wave of questions that we've gotten, great engagement. Thank you so much. We will be answering and addressing your questions in a write-up in due course, and we will aim to send that over to you, sometime next week. And for more information on some of the research that we had mentioned and the work that we do, please feel free to visit our Telco Cloud Hub for more details on our research and insights. In that case, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day, and you'll receive a short feedback survey after this, so please take a couple of minutes to answer that too. Thank you.